the boardroom on the 42nd floor of the tallest glass tower in the city. That morning, the sky was gray, the sunlight muted, as if holding its breath for a looming upheaval. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, thin beams of light fell across the long table, where a thick contract lay waiting, the bold print on its front page spelling out $100 million. No one spoke. The air was taut, stretched like a bowstring to its breaking point. All eyes turned toward the man at the head of the table. Richard Evans, the 55-year-old CEO, tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair cut close, his steel gray suit pressed to perfection, the glint of a Patek Philippe watch at his wrist. In his right hand, he rolled a Mont Blanc fountain pen, a habit whenever the weight of a decision pressed down on him. Every movement radiated a quiet authority that made others tread lightly. On his left sat his lawyer. On his right, his nephew Kyle Evans, vice president of the company, and the man who had engineered this deal. Across from them, 4 suited representatives of an international conglomerate smiled politely, too politely. Their eyes carried the calm assurance of men who already believed victory was theirs. "Shall we sign, Mr. Evans?" One of them, a silver-haired gentleman with a smooth British accent, asked softly. Richard didn't answer immediately. He lowered the pen to the page. 1 second, 2, and then, "Sir, that contract is a trap. If you sign it, you'll lose everything." The voice cut through the silence like a blade. Everyone stiffened. It wasn't from anyone seated at the table. It came from behind Richard, from a black woman in her early 30s, dressed in a simple black and white uniform, hair tied back neatly, her gaze fixed on him. Her name was Mira Johnson, the company's cleaning and tea-serving staff. A shadow in the building. Someone walked past 100 times without remembering. And yet here she stood, at the edge of the polished boardroom light, dropping words that detonated like thunder. Kyle shot to his feet, his face twisted with outrage. "Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us." "What did you just say? Someone like you dares to interfere?" Mira didn't back down. Her face had drained of color, but her eyes stayed locked on Richard. Her voice trembled but did not break. "I'm sorry, but please, don't sign." Richard turned. His face was unreadable, but his gray-blue eyes narrowed, sharp and steady. No anger, no surprise, just silent calculation, as though weighing the air itself. Kyle sneered. "Uncle, I brought these partners to the table. I vetted everything. Transparent records, clean legal standing, solid projections. And her," he jerked his chin at Mira. "A janitor, no degree, no voice here. Would you trust her over me?" The tension thickened until it felt cuttable. Mira stood trembling, hands clenching the hem of her uniform. Her cheeks quivered, but her gaze never faltered. In her eyes lay desperation, urgency, a soul who had seen the abyss and feared its pull, someone with nothing left to lose. I have no proof, only my word. But if you sign, you may regret it." Kyle slammed his palm on the table. "Ridiculous. Get her out." A few others nodded. The visiting partners exchanged quick glances. Richard's lawyer leaned in and whispered, "Mr. Evans, we should proceed. The contract has been thoroughly reviewed." No one stood with Mira, but Richard still hadn't signed. He lifted his eyes, studying her for a long moment. No one could read what passed behind his gaze. Mira stood frozen, the weight of her life pressing down, past, present, all the words unsaid, all the truths she dared not face. And then, the pen touched paper. A sharp stroke. Richard's signature sprawled across the final line. Firm, cold, irreversible. Mira flinched. She closed her eyes, bowed her head, and said nothing more. Quietly, she turned and walked away. The glass door opened, then shut behind her, sealing off the last chance she had tried to protect. Outside, the corridor stretched long and cold. Her footsteps echoed in the heavy silence. She did not cry, she did not rage, but her clenched fist bled at the nails. No one knew. She was holding on to the last breath of a conscience being torn apart. Before she ever stepped into that boardroom, where every eye would pin her down like a thorn, Mira Johnson had been nothing more than a shadow. No address, no ID, no dream. It was winter, 3 years ago. Snow fell thick, wind slashed against her face, and the sky was as gray and blotched as the ceilings of abandoned buildings. Mira lived in a derelict bus in the old industrial district. No doors, no windows, only dust-caked seats and a corner she lined with cardboard to sleep on. Every night, she curled up beneath 2 ragged coats, shivering, listening to the rats scratching and drunks fighting outside. By day, she drifted from fast food chains begging for leftovers, or scrubbed dishes for a few dollars to buy instant noodles. Her documents had vanished long ago, in a flight from a place she would never name. She had no one, no parents, no relatives, no past. Only one word remained: Mira. Her name, the last shard of who she once was. That day, as she sat under the awning of an office tower to escape a sudden rain, she saw a man in a suit step out of a car and drop his wallet. A brown leather wallet fell open right at her feet. He didn't notice. Mira picked it up. Inside wasn't much cash, but cards of every kind: bank, ID, papers of identity, and one business card. Richard Evans, CEO, Evans Global. She gripped that wallet all night. Not for money, but because for the first time in months, she felt she might be able to do something right. The next morning, she washed herself in a public restroom, borrowed a charity coat, and walked to Evans Global headquarters. When she returned the wallet at reception, no one believed she hadn't taken a cent. But belief wasn't the point. When Richard himself learned of it, he came down to meet her. Mira stood frozen in the glittering lobby, staring at him with suspicion and fear. "Do you need a job?" he asked, voice calm, cold as ice dropping into crystal. She didn't answer, just nodded. And so the woman with no papers, no address, became another shadow in the million-dollar tower. Her job had no title. At first cleaning corridors, then pouring water, brewing tea, wiping glass, carrying files. She never complained, never late, never absent, never raised her voice. She walked lightly, eyes lowered, speaking little. People called her many things: the window girl, that black cleaner on the 3rd floor, or nothing at all. Mira didn't resent it. Compared to scavenging bread crusts from dumpsters, this was the most decent life she'd ever had. Yet contempt never vanished. It simply changed its shape. She became the butt of office jokes. Want to study law and replace the legal department? Careful, this red carpet isn't for shoe shiners. She smiled faintly, bowed her head, and carried on, because each steady step was a silent slap against their prejudice. When the CEO announced a massive deal with an international consortium, the office broke into fever. Meetings piled up, coffee doubled, printers screamed. Mira drifted everywhere unnoticed. And in those days, among the faces brought in by the CEO's nephew, she saw a man who froze the blood in her veins. Him. Tall, lean, Armani suit fitting perfectly. Not the lead negotiator, yet always at the front when entering the office. Black hair streaked with silver, and that smile, half a mouth, rehearsed, calculating, polished like a speech learned by heart. She knew that smile. She could never mistake it. Now he was here, shaking hands with the man who had given her a second life. From that moment, Mira no longer slept through a single night. She began watching him more closely. Watching as if letting him slip from her sight for even a second would destroy her all over again. She didn't want to believe it, but her instincts screamed. He was plotting something. As the contract date drew near and his smile widened, Mira's unease only grew. No one else noticed. No one remembered her. All focus was on the $100 million signature. Only Mira shook, silently, more each day. Each time she passed the boardroom, her heart clenched. Each time he smiled, she wanted to scream, because she remembered that smile. The last thing she saw before losing both her dignity and her freedom. And now, he still smiled the same way, only with no flicker of recognition in his eyes. He didn't remember her, but she could never forget him. Time did not stop. 2 weeks had passed since the contract was signed. Mira, The black maid, driven out of the boardroom under eyes dripping with pity and contempt, now sat silently beside her cleaning basket, looking up at pale faces drifting past. No noise, no excitement, no smiles like before. Evans' global headquarters felt stripped of its soul. It started with accounting. They discovered the finance reports no longer connected to the new investment accounts. Every link redirected to an anonymous server. Banks raised red flags, temporarily suspending access due to suspected fraud. Within a day, branch offices spiraled into chaos. The sweet fruit of the $100 million contract, a subsidiary deal with an international music group, vanished from the archive. No email confirmations, no hard copy, no trace, as if it had never existed. Richard Evans, CEO, stopped sleeping. He wasn't old, barely past 50, but his hair turned grayer by the hour. His tie stayed crooked, coffee outpaced water, and every call to partners was a struggle to contain rage. The answers he received were hollow. Everything is fine, just internal procedure. We're updating the system. Likely just a technical error. But a man who had lived his life in contracts knew. The moment people said fine too often, collapse had already begun. What Richard didn't know downstairs in a tiny janitor's break room was Mira, curled in a corner, clutching a USB drive as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling back into the abyss. That night, she dreamed. A keyboard, a flashing screen, a 40-page contract filled with traps. This time a family company, a single mother building a chain of preschools, clause after clause. If Party B fails to meet Q1 KPIs, all shares will be transferred. Mira had drafted that contract. She had seen the woman's tears afterward, and then she had fled all the way here. She woke before dawn, the ceiling fan creaking in the cold dark. Pulling the USB from her coat pocket, she stared at it. Small, black, scratched, no logo, no brand. Inside lay the original contract she drafted more than 3 years ago. Extracted internal emails. A recording of the man who once stood over her shoulder, dictating every clause. His smile etched into every bite. Him. And now he was here again, repeating the cycle on a larger scale. Mira trembled. She had no choice left. She could not remain silent. On the 16th night after the contract was signed, Richard had fallen asleep at his desk. The top-floor office sat dark, save for one tired lamp that painted his face not as a CEO, but as a man crushed under too much weight. Mira placed the USB beside his hand, then slowly knelt. Her voice was a whisper, yet in the silence, it cut the air. "Sir." Richard stirred. His eyes narrowed at the sight of her. Tears streaked, yet unflinching. "I'm sorry for not speaking sooner." He started to ask, but Mira pressed on. "Before I was homeless, before I returned your wallet, I worked in an organization that defrauded businesses, not willingly, but I did it. They forced me to draft contracts full of traps." She inhaled deeply. "The man in your nephew's delegation, the salt and pepper hair, deep voice. He was the one who pulled me in. He knew I had no papers, no past. He promised me a chance at life. What I got was a nightmare that never left me." Richard said nothing. Mira's voice broke. "The moment I saw him here, I knew. If I stayed silent, it would all repeat. So I kept this." She pushed the USB toward him. "It has the template contracts, the recording, other evidence. They don't know I have it. I almost destroyed it. But you, when you looked at me, you didn't see an invisible shadow. You asked if I needed work. You gave me life again. I owe you this." Finally, Richard spoke. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" Mira paused. "Then, because I was afraid. Afraid my past would drag me back. Afraid you'd see me as a fraud. Afraid of being cast out again. But now I know. Silence makes me no different from them." She bowed her head. The air thickened. Then Richard nodded. Slightly. "Thank you." No more words. He turned, dialing numbers. Within the hour, the top legal team arrived. Cybersecurity, corporate law, internal audit. The USB was plugged in. data extracted, every clause scrutinized, and the lawyers' faces drained pale. "Sir, this aligns with every abnormality. The equity transfers, asset liquidation clauses, legal bindings, they all funnel toward one outcome: total loss of control if the partners enforce it." An older lawyer stood, voice hard. "Sir, this isn't a contract. This is an orchestrated fraud." Mira stood silently by the door. She knew this was only the beginning. News spread faster than a storm. Just days after Richard Evans uncovered the truth hidden inside the small USB Mira had brought him, Evans' global headquarters became the center of the financial media world. No longer just a tech corporation, it now stood at the heart of an international investigation into corporate fraud on a massive scale. The so-called strategic partners turned out to be nothing more than a front for a global network of money laundering and asset seizure. Through fabricated contracts and shell companies masquerading as legitimate investment groups, they had built an empire of deception. Once the documents were handed over to the Federal Financial Investigation Bureau, the dominoes fell quickly. Satellite companies had their accounts frozen. Phantom branches were exposed. Suspicious wire transfers traced back. Each layer of the onion peeled back revealed another lie. The mastermind was identified: Leonard Clay, the same man who once smiled politely across Richard's boardroom table, now an international fugitive. He faced charges of corporate fraud, contract manipulation, and even forging digital signatures to seize assets. Inside the boardroom, Richard Evans sat in silence. Across from him was Kyle, his nephew, the young man who had proudly introduced these partners as his crowning achievement. Now Kyle sat pale, eyes hollow from sleepless nights, hair unkempt. On his wrist still gleamed the smartwatch Leonard had given him, now evidence in a criminal case. Richard's voice was calm, sharp as glass. "What did you trade our trust for?" Kyle stammered. I didn't think it was like this. They told me it was just sponsorship, that if the deal went through, I'd get shares. They said I'd be deputy CEO. Richard gave a bitter laugh, one with no trace of amusement. "Ignorance is not a crime, but weaponizing it to destroy trust is." That single sentence ended everything. No shouting, no insults, only Richard's swift decision. Kyle was dismissed immediately, and his betrayal laid bare before the board. At the same time, Mira, the black maid once dismissed as a shadow in the company halls, was summoned to court as a key witness. The case shook the world of corporate law. Dressed simply, hair tied neatly, Mira carried herself with quiet composure. Each step she took into the courtroom was steady, like the measured keystrokes of a piano. She testified clearly. The links between Leonard Clay and the criminal network, how they designed predatory contracts, how she was once forced to draft those contracts, why she had fled, and why she kept the USB. Every piece was cross-checked. Judges nodded repeatedly. Prosecutors even urged that she be spared from criminal liability, citing her whistleblowing as vital, not only saving a corporation from collapse but dismantling a global fraud ring. In the end, Mira received the lightest sentence: probation, no criminal record, and formal thanks from the investigative bureau. The headlines no longer mocked her as the maid meddling in million-dollar deals. Instead, they read, "The employee who exposed a fraud empire. How one USB saved a corporation." After the trial, Mira faded from the press, but she did not leave the company. A month later, Evans Global held an internal meeting. Mira was officially appointed to the internal legal compliance team, tasked with contract audits and fraud detection. Richard Evans personally handed her the appointment letter. "From a maid no one remembered," he said softly, shaking her hand, "to the one person ensuring I'll never sign the wrong contract again." For the first time since she had entered the building, Mira smiled, an unguarded, genuine smile. Evans Global recovered. Once shaken, it did not fall. Instead, its reputation grew stronger, rebuilt on transparency and courage. Media called it the comeback of integrity. Small businesses sought to learn from Mira's audit methods, simple, practical, and incorruptible. A year later, the headquarters glowed under autumn sunlight. Employees moved briskly through the lobby, voices alive with renewed purpose. On the 35th floor, the elevator doors opened. Mira stepped out. No longer in a maid's uniform. She wore a plain business suit, files in hand. Her hair caught the light, glinting auburn. Her face tilted toward the sun, unburdened. A white colleague nodded at her. She nodded back, not lowering her gaze, not timid. And then, at last, Mira smiled. Not a polite smile, not one of gratitude, but the smile of someone who had reclaimed the right to live as a human being, free. Message. There are people society dismisses with cheap labels. The servant, the nobody, the shadow without worth, because of skin, background, or mistakes once made. But sometimes, it's the forgotten ones who hold the truth, who shield the world from one more wrong, who spark the last flame of conscience in the dark. Mira once hid in silence, ashamed of her past, until the day she chose to stand, not to prove she was greater than anyone else, but to protect the last trace of kindness she carried inside. That choice, quiet but unshakable, reshaped her fate. Because freedom does not come from who others say you are. It comes when you dare to live by the truth inside your own heart.